Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my 2016 wrap-up. This is going to include the books that I read in February, and considering that starting in February and also in March I read a lot of graphic novels as well, I decided to make a separate video for all the graphic novels that I read. I have to talk about 5 books in this video that I read in February, and the first one was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is the first book that I picked up in February, but I read it throughout the whole month and I absolutely adored this book. This is my first book by Margaret Atwood, and to my shame, before I started watching booktube videos, I hadn't even heard of her. She's a Canadian author and this book was published in 1985, and it is a book about a dystopian world where the USA has become a theocracy, which is a religious dictatorship. In this theocracy, a lot of things are changed. Mostly a lot of things have changed for women. In this theocracy, there does not exist the notion of men not being able to have children. It's always the women's fault. A handmaid is a woman who is fertile, so she can have children, and she is hired for a 2-year period in the house of a commander who is someone of a high rank, and he cannot have children with his wife because she is not fertile. Handmaids are kept in the commander's house, and once a month during their fertility window they are supposed to have sex with the commander in the attempts of getting pregnant. The story takes place in 3 narrative planes. One of them is the present and describes this world that the handmaid lives in, and the other 2 are in the past. One of the past planes is prior to this theocracy getting control over the government, and one of them is after they've taken control but during the transition period where still things are changing. I found this book entirely fascinating. I think that the world creation in this, the dystopian world, was incredible. The writing and the pacing, I loved everything about this book. I do want to make more of an in-depth review for this because I don't feel I could do it justice in a little wrap-up. I don't think I could do it justice in a review either. I think this is a very important book. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend that you read this. Like I said, The Handmaid's Tale I read throughout the whole month, and in the middle of the month I remember I took part in Rainbow-thon, which was a readathon where you're supposed to pick books with the colors of the rainbow on the spine. I did that. I didn't do a wrap-up. So the rest of the books I read for that readathon. The first one I read was The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This one I also read because February was Read Soul Lit and because it was Black History Month. I had heard a lot of good things about this book and I read this. It was a good book, but I did feel slightly underwhelmed by it, and I realized that I am in a huge minority when I say this. Almost everyone that has read this book loved it. Everyone's reviews on Goodreads are stellar and saying how this is a life-changing book and is so emotional, and I could totally see that. This is a really good book, but it failed to give me that profound emotional response. Plot-wise, I think this takes place in the 60s in the USA in the South, and it follows Celie, who is a young girl. She has a very hard life. She is abused, sexually abused, physically abused. She's married off against her will to a man who actually wants to marry her sister, and she has an even worse life with him than she had back home with her father, who was very abusive to her. She marries this man and she is stuck raising his children and having to take even more abuse from him. She is separated from her sister, and this book is told in epistolary form through Celie's letters to God. I think this book touched upon a lot of important themes, a lot of themes of discrimination, a lot of issues of relationships and how women were treated back then, and the idea of gaining independence and standing up for yourself. I do see all that, but I did fail to connect on a more deeper level with it. Still, this is a good book. I do recommend it. I do think that people should read this because it is an important book. I just didn't really feel in love with it like most of everyone else who's read it. The book I read after that one is Malice by Keigo Higashino. This was a Japanese detective mystery. I love Keigo Higashino's mysteries. I do have a review for this that I made for my Japanese Madness series, so I'm going to be leaving a link of that down below. Next up after that, I read Eating Chinese Food Naked by Mei Ying. I have to admit, I picked this book up because of the title. I picked it up last year at a used book sale. I had no idea what it was about, but this book really impressed me. I really loved it. This was Mei Ying's debut novel, and from what I was able to see online, I think it is her only novel. And from reading a little bit about her life, I think it is highly inspired from her own life. This book follows Ruby, a recent Columbia graduate of women's studies who is forced to move back into her house with her parents who live in Queens after she graduates because she doesn't find a job. Ruby is the youngest daughter of Franklin and Belle, who are Chinese immigrants. They live in Queens and they own a laundry shop, and their house is behind the laundry shop. This has always affected Ruby's life, and the fact that she wasn't American and she was Chinese American has always affected her life and her perception of life. And also the relationship between her parents, which is not very warm and tender, has always affected her life. And she's always felt this duty to protect her mother, and she feels that by having gone away to college, she has abandoned her mother, and she not only needs to go back into her parents' house because she doesn't have money because she's not working, she also feels like she doesn't really want to work, she doesn't really want to move on, and she wants to just live in her parents' house and protect her mother. I thought this book was wonderfully written. It didn't have much of an action happening in the book. It didn't have a big plot. It was more of a character study, I guess. I was very touched, and I loved being a part of these characters' lives for the duration of this book. I actually started reading this in January and I finished it in February, and I think I was reading very little a day because I really didn't want the book to finish. I felt like sneaking into these people's lives. I like the writing a lot. It is very detailed. It describes things very in depth. I highly recommend this book, and I think it's a pity if this is her only book because I really wish that she wrote more that I could read. The last book that I read in February was a book that I've been meaning to read for over a year now, and that is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I read Gone Girl about a year and a half ago, I think. It was around the time I started my channel, and I really liked it. Since then, I wanted to read her other books, and I wanted to read Sharp Objects first because I heard that Dark Places is amazing, and I've heard people say that reading Sharp Objects last kind of got them disappointed because it's not as good as Gone Girl or Dark Places. I do have to disagree with that, at least for Gone Girl. I think I enjoyed this throughout better than I enjoyed Gone Girl, and I loved Gone Girl, but I felt like I loved Gone Girl more from the midpoint to the end, while the first half with just Nick's perspective was a little slow. This one grabbed me from the beginning and I couldn't put it down. It was so good. It follows Camille, who is a journalist in Chicago. Her boss sends her back to her hometown, which is a little tiny American suburbia town. She needs to go there and write a piece on the murder of two girls and kind of try to do a bit of detective work while writing this article. She goes back there and she has to live with her mother. Her relationship with her mother isn't very good, and there's a lot of things from Camille's childhood that she's been trying to repress. She's trying to write this article and investigate what happened to those two girls and how they were murdered, and also kind of trying to deal with her own trauma and deal with the things that she had repressed from her childhood. And I thought this was so good. I loved this. I love psychological thrillers, and I think Gillian Flynn's writing is incredible. It's so dark and gritty. I love this a lot, and I highly recommend it for people who are into psychological thrillers, and I can't wait to read Dark Places. I have it, and I can't wait to read it. This was it for my February wrap-up. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'll be talking about the graphic novels that I read in February and March in a separate video. Also, I will hopefully make a separate review for The Handmaid's Tale, which was stellar. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with my March wrap up and my graphic novels wrap up. Have a great day. Bye.